They call themselves sheep herders and cowboys, and they're not sort of mutually exclusive. But you're right, it's always cowboys are higher on the totem pole than sheep herders.
Although they make jokes about cowboys being mindless. There's a very funny joke, I don't want to tell it now, but there isn't a lot of talking in this film, so you remember any of the dialogue. It must have been, it required incredible patience for you to do this. You do tell the story totally through images and don't explain anything. We have to figure it all out. That was obviously the approach that you decided upon from the start. What would have happened if you had said, these Norwegian sheep herders had some titles at the beginning, have been doing this for 4 generations, and this is a chronicle of a trip that they took across Montana?
I think if we had done that, and believe me, we did think about it, and it was suggested to us by many of our colleagues, but we decided not to do that because we didn't want people to watch the entire film with that in mind. And we didn't want people to constantly think, okay, this is going to be the last minute, or this is going to be the pivotal moment that is going to make them decide that they can never go back up into the mountains and do this again. We wanted people to trust us, an audience to trust us, and just sit back and let the images play and follow the story and then see the ending at the end.
And some of the images are just gorgeous. And there are scenes that have been described as hypnotic. When you're shooting them, are you thinking of them in those terms?
At times, maybe.
For example, the shearing of the sheep, which is a very long scene. And at the beginning, you wonder, how long are we going to see this? And then after a while, you just get caught up in the rhythms.
It's actually it's a really short scene, and most of the scenes are short, but it seems interminably long because there are only, in that case, 2 shots in the whole scene. And the average shot length on television is something like 3 seconds or 4 seconds, and the average shot length in Sweetgrass is perhaps 3 minutes or 4 minutes. So it's a radically different kind of relationship to time. You're right. I would say that when I was recording, I was listening to everybody, and indeed sheep, and even occasionally horses and dogs wearing wireless lavalier microphones, and they could be up to 3 miles away from each other, up to 1.5 miles away from me, and I'd be getting a totally radio frequency free recording of them. So I'd have these completely surreal kind of synchronicities of what people were doing that wasn't being seen on screen at all. Acoustically, it was incredibly intense as well as visually.
So you were handling the sound, and what were you doing, Lisa?
Minding the ranch. When we decided to do the film, we had a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and we went all together as a family, not really knowing what to expect up in the mountains of Montana. And when we got there, we found out that there were a lot of predator problems. Gray wolves had been recently reintroduced into Yellowstone Park, and they were federally protected, as were grizzly bears.
And these are threats to the sheep?
They're threats to the sheep and would have been threats to the children. So I stayed down on the flatlands while Lucien went up in the mountains, and I had my own camera, and I filmed a lot of town life, sort of the way Frederick Wiseman shoots institutions. I filmed town meetings, I filmed auctions, I filmed some rodeos, I filmed various sheepdog trials, all sorts of shooting events, and we were going to use that initially to sort of dress up the film. And what happened was Lucien came down from the mountains with footage that we felt was more compelling, so we decided to go with his, put mine on the shelf for perhaps a later film.
But this does capture traditions that we fear will die out. What happens if the sheep herders no longer do this? Does that mean that sheep herding will move to other places, or are there still areas where this sort of thing continues to be conducted?
Well, there are still sheep. So what's ending is the fact that there will never be transhumans. There will never be people trailing or driving their sheep up into these mountains again. They never can be. In 1975, it became a federally designated wilderness area, and all of the grazing permits since then were grandfathered in. There's never been allowed to be a new one, and this was the last one, and it's now no longer in existence. So there will never be sheep up there again. And it's part of the American conception of the environment, of the pristine, authentic environment, is that domesticated species are somehow unnatural. It's very different in the Alps and the Pyrenees.
Or New Zealand, for that matter.
Or New Zealand, exactly. But Americans don't eat lamb, and we don't wear wool. There are 6 million sheep in this country today, and in 50 years ago there were 6 million sheep in Montana alone. So there were very few sheep left, and it's pretty hard to get by.
How did the herders act when you were filming them? You're doing this fly-on-the-wall approach. After a while, did you just become invisible?
I guess I would say there's sort of fly on the wall, and then what some people have called like fly in the eye, and then even fly in the soup. So when I wasn't filming, I was herding with them. I mean, I was a greenhorn. I didn't really know sheep. I grew up in Liverpool, and the Lake District was on the back door, but I wasn't a sheep herder. So I was learning on the fly about sheep and about herding and about the West. But I also, when I was filming, I'd wear or even when I wasn't actually, I'd wear an absurd kind of harness that would go up my spine and that would allow the camera to be suspended in front of my head, from dawn till dusk. So it really became part of my identity.
Well, for example, you capture some pretty intimate moments. The one where one of the herders was literally crying on a cell phone to his mother about how hard his life was and how miserable he was. And of course, we also see him in the midst of this sweeping, beautiful landscape. And the irony is not lost on us. Yeah. But I wonder whether he would have said something like that if he had been thinking, well, there's a cameraman who's capturing all of this.
I think, I mean, I was right there with him. I was right next to him when it was happening. I just didn't feel it was appropriate, for 3 minutes to leave the camera on him. And as you say, the irony wouldn't have been quite the same without the slow pan. But also when you think of the pastoral, this is definitely a pastoral film in a very different, much more ambivalent kind of register. Poets and painters since the classics, since Virgil, have waxed lyrical about the bucolic Arcadian lifestyle, but you never get any sense of what it's like to inhabit a sheep herder's body, of the effort, of the pain, of the exhaustion,
and you as well. You were there. You had physical. You had suffered physically, didn't you?
Double foot surgery and advanced degenerative arthritis as a result of it. But I still put in a lot less work than I think the herders did themselves, or the sheep for that matter. They probably work harder than anybody.